The great hall of Vila Prime stretched out like a cathedral made of starlight. Massive windows curved along the walls, showing the endless black of space dotted with distant suns. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, each one containing a tiny artificial star that cast warm golden light across the polished floors. Representatives from 17 different spacefaring civilizations had gathered here for the annual Galactic Consul assembly, and the air buzzed with 100 different languages being spoken at once. Lisa Hartwell stood near the back of the hall, watching everything with quiet attention. She was a woman of average height with short brown hair that she kept practical and neat. Her uniform was simple gray fabric without any decorations or medals. She looked like someone who might fetch drinks or carry documents for more important people. That was exactly how she wanted to look. Around her, alien diplomats moved in colorful groups. The Veilith were tall and slender, their blue skin shimmering under the lights as they discussed trade agreements in musical voices. The Dorothy delegation huddled together, their forearms gesturing rapidly as they debated something in clicks and whistles. Everywhere Lisa looked, she saw power on display. Jeweled robes, ceremonial armor, glowing symbols of rank that floated above shoulders. Like tiny crowns, humanity had only been part of the Galactic Consul for 19 years. In the long history of the galaxy, that was less than a heartbeat. Most of the older species still viewed humans as children who had stumbled into a room full of adults. They tolerated the newcomers, but did not take them seriously. Lisa had grown used to the sideways glances and the polite dismissals. She picked up a glass of water from a passing server and sipped it slowly. Her eyes tracked the movements of the Zelrani delegation on the far side of the hall. They were impossible to miss. The Zelrani stood 8 feet tall on average, their bodies covered in thick scales that ranged from deep green to black. Their faces were flat and wide, with small yellow eyes that seemed to glow with inner fire. They moved through the crowd like sharks through a school of fish, and other species stepped aside to let them pass. The Zelrani Empire had been part of the Consul for over 600 years. They had built their civilization on conquest and strength. Every Zelrani child learned to fight before they learned to read. Their military academies were legendary, and their battle fleets had crushed rebellions across a dozen star systems. They believed in hierarchy above all else. The strong ruled. The weak served. It was simple and brutal, and had worked for them for centuries. Commander Vrakthos was the leader of their delegation. He stood taller than most of his kind, nearly 9 feet of muscle and scale wrapped in ceremonial armor that gleamed like polished obsidian. Scars crossed his face and arms, each one a story of combat survived. He surveyed the hall with obvious contempt, as if everyone present was beneath his notice. His eyes eventually landed on Lisa. She was standing near the seating area that had been reserved for the Zelrani delegation. She had positioned herself there deliberately, close enough to observe, but not so close as to seem threatening. Unfortunately, Vrakthos did not see a careful observer. He saw a small human woman in a plain uniform standing where she did not belong. He pushed through the crowd toward her, his heavy footsteps making the floor vibrate slightly. Other aliens quickly moved out of his path. A Veilith diplomat nearly spilled his drink trying to get away fast enough. Vrakthos did not slow down or apologize. Why would he? They were all beneath him. Lisa watched him approach. She did not move or change her expression. Her heartbeat remained steady and calm. Vrakthos stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. He smelled like iron and smoke. His yellow eyes narrowed as he looked down at her, taking in her simple uniform and lack of visible rank. "You are in my space," he said. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. The translator device on his collar converted his words into flat English. "Move aside, human." Lisa took another sip of her water before responding. I have authorization to be in this area, she said politely. But there is plenty of room if you would like to sit down. A low growl rumbled in the Zelrani commander's chest. Around them, conversations began to quiet as other delegates noticed the confrontation. Some watched with open curiosity. Others pretended not to see, keeping their eyes fixed on their drinks or their companions. I did not ask for your permission, Rakdos said. I gave you an order. Your kind has been part of the Consul for less than 20 of your short years. You do not give commands to a Zelrani warrior. You do not stand where we stand. You do not speak unless spoken to. He leaned closer, his breath hot against her face. Now move, before I move you myself. Lisa set her glass down on a nearby table. She folded her hands in front of her and met his gaze without flinching. I understand that you are used to being obeyed, she said, but I will not be moving. I suggest we both remain calm and enjoy the evening. Something dangerous flickered in the Zelrani's eyes. In his entire life, no one had refused a direct command from him. Not his soldiers. Not foreign diplomats. Not anyone. This tiny human woman, with her plain clothes and soft voice, had just told him no. In front of dozens of witnesses, his hand shot out faster than most eyes could follow. Massive clawed fingers closed around Lisa's shoulder and shoved hard. She flew backward, her feet leaving the ground for a moment before she crashed into a decorative pillar. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs. Pain flared across her back and shoulders. The hall fell completely silent. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. Hundreds of alien eyes focused on the small human. Woman slumped against the pillar, and the towering Zelrani warrior standing over her with his fists clenched. Rakdos smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. This was the natural order of things. The strong dominated. The weak submitted. The human had learned her place, and now everyone in the hall had seen it happen. He turned to address his delegation, ready to enjoy their approval. He did not notice the expressions on the faces of the other humans in the hall. He did not see how they had gone pale, how their spines had straightened, how their eyes had widened with something that looked almost like fear. But it was not fear for themselves, it was fear for him. Lisa pressed her hand against the pillar and slowly pushed herself upright. Her shoulder throbbed where the Zelrani's claws had gripped her, and she could feel bruises forming along her spine. She had taken worse hits during training exercises, but those had been controlled environments with medical teams standing by. This was different. This was a diplomatic summit where one wrong word could start a war. She brushed dust from her uniform and took a deep breath. Around her, the silence continued to stretch like a held breath. She could feel hundreds of eyes watching her, waiting to see what the small human woman would do next. Most of them expected her to cry or run away. Some probably expected her to scream for help. None of them expected what actually happened. She straightened her collar and stood at attention. The posture was subtle but unmistakable to anyone with military training. Feet together, shoulders back, chin level, hands at her sides. It was the stance of a soldier awaiting inspection. It was the stance of someone who had been through much worse than a shove and a bruised shoulder. Rakdos noticed her defiance, and his smile faded. He took a step toward her, clearly intending to finish what he had started. If words would not teach this human her place, perhaps more direct methods would. A voice cut through the silence before he could move. Commander Rakdos. The words were spoken in perfect galactic common, the diplomatic language used by all Consul members. They carried across the hall with the clarity of a bell, stopping the Zelrani warrior mid-step. He turned to find the source of the interruption. A human man stood near the center of the hall. He wore a crisp naval uniform covered in medals and insignia that glittered under the starlight chandeliers. His name was Daniel Price, and he served as the official liaison between the human military and the Galactic Consul. His face was pale, and his jaw was tight with barely controlled emotion. Behind him stood 3 other humans in military dress. Their uniforms were equally decorated, marking them as senior officers of significant rank. They stood at rigid attention, their eyes fixed forward, their expressions carved from stone. None of them moved to help Lisa. None of them looked directly at her. This was not because they did not care. It was because military protocol demanded they wait for orders from their superior officer. And their superior officer was not Daniel Price. Daniel cleared his throat and spoke again, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast hall. "I believe there has been a misunderstanding," he said. "Allow me to make proper introductions." Rakdos crossed his arms over his armored chest. "I do not care about your introductions," he growled. "The female was in my way. I moved her. This is how the strong deal with the weak. Your people should learn this lesson." "Perhaps," Daniel said carefully. "But I think you should know who you just pushed." Something in his tone made several nearby diplomats lean closer to listen. The Valeth ambassador tilted his head with obvious curiosity. Even some of the Zilrani delegation exchanged uncertain glances. Daniel gestured toward Lisa with a formal bow. "May I present Grand Admiral Lisa Hartwell," he announced. His voice grew stronger with each word. "Supreme Commander of the United Earth Defense Force, holder of the Congressional Star of Valor, architect of the Proxima Defense Line, victor of the Battle of Kepler Station, survivor of the Nexus incursion." He paused to let the title sink in before continuing. "She is the highest-ranking military officer in human history. She carries the launch authorization for over 4,000 interstellar warships. She commands the loyalty of 800 million service members across 12 star systems." The words fell into the silent hall like stones dropped into still water. Ripples of shock spread outward as delegates processed what they had just heard. The Zilrani who had been laughing moments ago stopped laughing. The aliens who had watched with amusement stopped being amused. Rakdos stood frozen in place. His yellow eyes moved from Daniel to Lisa and back again, searching for some sign that this was a joke or a trick. He found none. Lisa finished brushing off her uniform and finally looked directly at him. Her expression held no anger, no rage, no wounded pride. Instead, she studied him with the calm, measured evaluation of a predator, deciding whether prey was worth the effort of a chase. "In human culture," she said quietly, "laying hands on a superior officer is a court-martial offense. The punishment ranges from imprisonment to execution, depending on the circumstances." She paused, and the silence seemed to press down on everyone present. "However, you did not know who I was. Cultural misunderstandings happen, especially in gatherings like this. I am willing to overlook the incident this once." She said it simply, without drama or emphasis. She did not raise her voice or make threats. She did not demand apologies or call for punishment. She simply stated facts and offered mercy in the same breath. Somehow, that made it worse. The Zilrani delegation had gone completely still. Even the most junior members understood what had just happened. Their commander, the warrior who had never lost a battle, who had killed dozens of enemies in single combat, who embodied everything their culture valued, had just been publicly corrected by someone he had treated as insignificant, and she had forgiven him for it. In Zilrani culture, mercy from a position of strength was the ultimate display of dominance. It meant that the victor considered the defeated so far beneath them that revenge was not worth the effort. It meant that the defeated posed no threat worth acknowledging. It was worse than being beaten in combat. It was being dismissed entirely. Rakdos felt his scales flush with heat as blood rushed to his face. His claws clenched at his sides. Every instinct screamed at him to attack, to prove his strength, to restore his honor through violence. But even through his rage, some small rational part of his mind recognized the truth. If he attacked the supreme commander of the human military in the middle of a diplomatic summit, it would mean war. And looking at the cold confidence in Lisa Hartwell's eyes, he suddenly was not certain the Zelrani Empire would win that war. The silence stretched on. Nobody moved, nobody breathed, and Lisa Hartwell waited patiently to see what the Zelrani commander would do next. Rakthos found his voice first. It came out rougher than he intended, scraped raw by the shock that still echoed through his mind. "Titles mean nothing," he said loudly, trying to project confidence he no longer felt. "Any species can invent impressive words. Your human rank holds no meaning to the Zelrani Empire. We do not bow to aliens, no matter what names they give themselves." A few of his warriors nodded in agreement, but their movements shortened. They had been trained since birth to follow their commander without question, but they had also been trained to recognize danger. Something about this situation felt wrong, like walking into an ambush they could not see. Around the hall, other delegates began tapping at their personal data devices. The consul maintained detailed records on every member species, including military assessments and historical documents. Information that had seemed unimportant an hour ago suddenly felt very relevant. Ambassador Cirith of the Valith was the first to speak. He was an older member of his species. His blue skin faded to a softer shade with age. He had served in the consul for over a century and had seen many confrontations between species. But even he seemed surprised by what his device was showing him. "I have been reading the consul records on Grand Admiral Hartwell," he said, his musical voice cutting through the tension. "The documentation is quite extensive." He looked up at Rakthos with an expression that might have been pity. "Perhaps you would like to hear some of it." Rakthos said nothing. His jaw was clenched so tight that his teeth ached. Cirith continued anyway. During the siege of Kepler Station, a pirate armada of 342 vessels surrounded a human colony on the edge of their territory. The colony held research facilities and over 2 million civilian inhabitants. Reinforcements were 11 days away at maximum speed. He paused to let that sink in. Grand Admiral Hartwell arrived with a fleet of 42 ships and held the line for all 11 days. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found 93 pirate vessels destroyed and the rest in full retreat. Human losses were minimal. A murmur rippled through the watching delegates. 300 against 42 were terrible odds by any military standard. Holding for 11 days against such numbers was not just impressive. It bordered on impossible. The Dorothy delegate stepped forward, adding to the account. His forearms gestured as he spoke, a habit of his species when conveying important information. "The Nexus incursion occurred 4 years ago," he said. "A rogue artificial intelligence escaped from a research station and began consuming everything in its path. 3 star systems were threatened. Other species debated responses while the machine intelligence grew stronger with each passing hour." He pulled up a holographic display that showed a tactical map of the affected region. Admiral Hartwell did not wait for consensus. She moved her fleet into position and lured the AI into a quantum instability field near a dying star. The gravitational forces disrupted the machine's processing centers, long enough for her ships to destroy its core programming. The threat was eliminated in 72 hours. He let the display fade. Other projections estimated the AI would have consumed a 4th system within the same time frame if she had not acted. More delegates were checking their devices now. The information spread through the hall like fire through dry grass. Stories that had seemed like exaggeration or propaganda suddenly looked very different in light of the woman standing quietly near the back of the room. One of Rakthos's advisors approached him quickly, speaking in low, urgent tones. The translator did not catch all of his words, but the meaning was clear from his expression. He was afraid. "Commander, the advisor whispered. "Our intelligence division has been studying humanity for years. Their official fleet reports to the Consul list approximately 2,000 active warships. But our analysts believe the true number is closer to 4,000. Perhaps more. They have been deliberately understating their military strength." Rakthos felt cold spread through his chest. Deception was not unknown among Consul species, but most tried to appear stronger than they were. Humans had done the opposite. They had hidden their power, let others think them weak, allowed themselves to be dismissed, and ignored. Why? The advisor continued his report. Their soldiers train in combat simulations that other species consider too dangerous to attempt. Their casualty rates during training exercises would be considered unacceptable by Zerani standards. But the survivors... He trailed off, searching for words. The survivors are exceptional. More skilled than anything our warriors have faced. Rakthos finally looked back at Lisa Hartwell. She had not moved during the entire exchange. She stood in the same spot where he had pushed her, her hands folded calmly in front of her, watching him with those steady brown eyes. There was no triumph in her expression. No satisfaction. Just patience. She was waiting for him to understand. And slowly, terribly, he began to. Humans had spent 19 years in the Consul being overlooked and underestimated. They had accepted dismissive treatment with apparent grace. They had sent delegations wearing plain uniforms without decorations. They had spoken softly in diplomatic meetings. They had made themselves invisible, all while building a military force capable of holding off hundreds of ships with dozens. All while developing strategies that could destroy threats other species feared to face. All while their supreme commander attended summits in the guise of a simple aide. This was not weakness. This was not the behavior of a young species fumbling through galactic politics. This was strategy. This was a civilization that had learned to survive by letting its enemies make assumptions. Rakthos had made an assumption. He had pushed a woman he thought was insignificant. He had tried to establish dominance through physical force. And now he was standing in a room full of witnesses who had just learned that the woman he pushed commanded enough firepower to glass his homeworld from orbit. His scales had gone from flushed to pale. His hearts were beating too fast. For the first time in his long warrior life, Commander Rakthos of the Zelrani Empire felt genuine fear, not of death. Death held no terror for a Zelrani. He was afraid of what came next. Lisa raised her hand slowly, palm out, a universal gesture for attention. The murmuring that had filled the hall died away immediately. Every eye in the room focused on her, from the towering Zelrani to the smallest delegate species. They waited to hear what the most powerful human in the galaxy would say next. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The acoustics of the great hall carried her words to every corner, and the translation devices made sure everyone understood. "I did not come to Vila Prime to make threats," she began. "I did not come to intimidate anyone or demand tribute or establish dominance. Humanity does not believe in power through spectacle. We prefer to let our actions speak across the years, rather than making speeches in crowded halls." She gestured down at her plain gray uniform. The fabric was simple and unadorned, without a single medal or ribbon visible anywhere. Many of you have noticed that I do not wear decorations on my uniform. This confuses some species. They wonder how anyone can tell my rank if I do not display my achievements. They assume I must not have any achievements worth displaying. A small smile crossed her face, there and gone in an instant. Human officers do not wear their victories on their chest because the weight would break us. Every medal represents lives lost under our command. Every ribbon marks a battle we wish had never been necessary. Every award reminds us of friends who did not come home. She paused, letting those words settle into the silence. I have been a soldier for 34 years. I have commanded ships and fleets and entire sectors of space. I have ordered thousands of men and women into battles that I knew some of them would not survive. Every night, I remember their faces. Every morning, I wake up carrying the weight of those decisions. Her voice remains steady, but something deeper moved behind her eyes. I do not flaunt my rank because leadership is a burden, not a prize. It is responsibility, not privilege. Anyone who seeks command for glory does not understand what command truly means. The Zorani delegation stood motionless, listening despite themselves. In their culture, warriors boasted of their kills. They displayed their scars with pride. They competed constantly to prove their strength and worth. The idea of carrying victories as weight rather than honor was alien to everything they believed. Lisa continued, her gaze moving slowly across the assembled delegates. Humanity remembers what it was like to be weak. Not so long ago, we huddled on a single planet, looking up at the stars and wondering what waited in the darkness. We told ourselves stories about monsters hiding in the void, creatures that would destroy us if they ever found our tiny world. We were afraid. She let that admission hang in the air. Fear was considered shameful by many species. Admitting to it in public was almost unheard of at diplomatic gatherings. But Lisa spoke of it simply, without embarrassment, as if discussing weather or trade routes. When we finally built ships that could carry us to the stars, we discovered that some of our fears were justified. The galaxy does contain monsters. We found pirates who preyed on the weak. We found empires that conquered for sport. We found machines that consumed worlds without caring whether anyone lived on them. Her expression hardened slightly. We learned to fight those monsters. We had no choice. Survival demanded it. Then her face softened again. But we also found friends. We found species willing to trade fairly and share knowledge freely. We found cultures that valued cooperation over conquest. We found beauty and wonder and possibility beyond anything we had imagined. She looked directly at Ambassador Sirith, then at the Dorathi delegate, acknowledging each with a small nod. The galaxy is vast and complicated. It holds both monsters and miracles. Humanity has learned that we must be prepared for both. She turned back to face Rakdos. The massive Zelrani warrior had not moved throughout her speech. His yellow eyes watched her with an intensity that bordered on desperation, as if he was searching for some trick or trap that would explain what was happening. Lisa took a step toward him. Then another. The crowd parted silently to let her pass. She walked without fear or hesitation. A small human woman approaching a creature that could crush her with one hand. She stopped within arm's reach of him and looked up to meet his gaze. "Commander Vrakthos," she said, "I do not hate you. I do not want you as an enemy. What happened here tonight was a misunderstanding born from assumptions that many species make about humanity. You saw my plain uniform and thought I was weak. You saw my quiet manner and thought I was timid. You saw my small size and thought I was prey." She shook her head slowly. "You were wrong. But being wrong is not a crime. Making mistakes is how we learn." She extended her hand toward him, palm open, in the human greeting of friendship. "My name is Lisa. I command the armed forces of the United Earth. I have spent my life preparing to defend my people against any threat the galaxy might send against us." Her voice was warm now, almost gentle. "But I would rather make friends than enemies. I would rather build bridges than burn them. I would rather find reasons to trust than reasons to fight." Her hand remained extended, waiting. "The choice is yours, Commander. We can walk away from this moment as enemies who will circle each other with suspicion and fear. Or we can walk away as something else. Something better." She smiled, and for the first time there was genuine warmth in her expression. I hope you will choose wisely." The entire hall held its breath. Rakdos stared at the small hand extended toward him. In Zilrani culture, accepting such a gesture after being publicly corrected would be seen as submission. It would mark him as lesser. His warriors would question his strength. His enemies would smell weakness. But looking into Lisa Hartwell's eyes, he saw something that challenged everything he had ever believed about power and dominance. He saw mercy that did not seek to humiliate. He saw strength that did not need to prove itself. He saw a warrior who had won without fighting. And for the first time in his life, Commander Vrakthos wondered if his people had been wrong about what true strength really meant. The moment stretched like taffy being pulled between 2 points. Every being in the great hall watched without breathing, without blinking, as the massive Zelrani warrior stared down at the human woman's extended hand. Vrakthos felt the weight of 1,000 eyes pressing against his scales. He felt his warriors watching from behind him, waiting to see what their commander would do. He felt the judgment of delegates from 17 different civilizations, all measuring him against some standard he had never considered before tonight. His claws flexed at his sides. His heart pounded in his chest like war drums. Every instinct bred into him across generations of warriors screamed that accepting this gesture meant defeat. It meant weakness. It meant everything his culture had taught him to despise. But something else whispered in his mind. Something quieter. Something that sounded almost like his grandmother's voice from memories, so old he had nearly forgotten them. She had told him once, when he was very young, that the strongest warriors were not those who won every battle. The strongest warriors were those who knew which battles were worth fighting. She had died in combat before he reached adulthood, but her words had stayed with him through all the years of blood and glory that followed. Tonight, standing in front of Lisa Hartwell, he finally understood what she had meant. He reached out and took the human's hand. Her grip was firm and warm, surprisingly strong for such a small creature. She did not squeeze too hard or hold too long. It was a greeting between equals, nothing more, nothing less. When they released, she nodded once with obvious respect. "Thank you, Commander," she said quietly. "I hope this is the beginning of something good for both our peoples." The hall erupted into motion. Conversations burst out on all sides as delegates processed what they had just witnessed. The Valith ambassador was already speaking rapidly into a communication device, updating his government. The Dorothy delegation clustered together, their four-armed gestures flying so fast their limbs blurred. Even the other Zelrani warriors exchanged glances that held more confusion than certainty. Nobody quite knew what to make of what had happened. A Zelrani commander had shown respect to an alien species. A human leader had responded to violence with grace. The natural order of the Consul, with its ancient hierarchies and established power structures, had shifted in ways that would take years to fully understand. Daniel Price approached Lisa carefully, his face still pale, but relief flooding his eyes. He stopped at a respectful distance and spoke softly enough that only she could hear. "Admiral, are you all right?" That impact with the pillar looked painful. Lisa rolled her shoulder experimentally, wincing slightly. "I will have some impressive bruises tomorrow. Nothing that will not heal." She glanced back at Vrakthos, who had retreated to speak with his own advisors. "The real question is whether anything lasting will come from tonight." Daniel followed her gaze. "You planned this, didn't you?" Standing near their seating area in a plain uniform, making yourself look unimportant. "You knew something like this might happen." Lisa was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of experience that came from decades of command. "I did not plan to be pushed into a pillar," she admitted. "But I've learned that sometimes the best way to change minds is to let people see their assumptions proven wrong." The Zelrani respected only strength. Tonight, they saw that strength does not always look the way they expected. Whether that lesson sticks will depend on many factors beyond my control. She turned to survey the hall, watching the swirling currents of conversation and negotiation that flowed around them. Several species that had previously ignored humanity were now directing pointed looks toward the human delegation. Some of those looks held new respect. Others held calculation and wariness. Change was coming, whether the galaxy was ready for it or not. Ambassador Sirith appeared at her elbow, his blue skin shimmering under the starlight chandeliers. "Grand Admiral Hartwell," he said formally, "I would be honored if you would join me for a conversation. The Valilith Assembly has long wished to establish deeper ties with humanity, but we were uncertain of your people's true nature. Tonight has been most illuminating." Lisa smiled and accepted the invitation. As she walked away with the Valith ambassador, Daniel watched her go with something like awe in his expression. In the space of one evening, she had done more for human diplomatic standing than years of careful negotiations had accomplished. Across the hall, Rakthos stood surrounded by his warriors. They spoke in low, urgent tones, debating what had happened and what it meant for their empire. Some argued that their commander had shown weakness by accepting the human's hand. Others pointed out that attacking a supreme commander at a diplomatic summit would have meant war with a power they had clearly underestimated. The debate would continue for many hours and many days after. It would spread beyond this hall to the highest councils of the Zelrani Empire. Old assumptions would be questioned. Old certainties would crack and crumble. And perhaps, in time, something new would grow in their place. The night continued. Delegates mingled and talked and schemed, as they always did at such gatherings. But the energy in the hall had changed. Humanity was no longer an afterthought, a young species to be tolerated and ignored. They had revealed themselves as something more complex and more dangerous than anyone had realized. More importantly, they had shown that danger could come wrapped in mercy. That power could express itself through restraint. That the strongest response to an attack might be an open hand rather than a closed fist. Late in the evening, Lisa found a quiet moment to stand near one of the great windows. Stars gleamed in the endless darkness beyond the glass, each one a sun with worlds spinning around it. So many possibilities. So many futures waiting to be written. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small photograph, worn soft at the edges from years of handling. It showed an elderly woman with gray hair and kind eyes, smiling at the camera from a garden full of flowers. Her grandmother had given her that photograph on the day Lisa left Earth to join the fleet. She had pressed it into Lisa's hands and spoken words that had guided her through every challenge since. "True strength," her grandmother had said, "is knowing you could destroy your enemies and choosing to make them your friends instead." Tonight, Lisa had honored that lesson. She tucked the photograph away and looked out at the stars. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, new opportunities to show the galaxy what humanity could be. She would face them the same way she had faced tonight, with patience, with wisdom, with strength that did not need to announce itself. The future was vast and uncertain, and full of wonder, and humanity was just getting started.